Green. So, funny enough, that one logo earlier, I guess, was us. Even though, before I come to the decarbonizing part, I tell you a little bit about the story, why we eventually managed to raise quite some funds, and why we are partly a marketplace, but partly not. So, I mean, everybody, most of the people in the room, I suppose, know what we're doing. Green buses and trains are literally all over the place. So that's the easy part. It's harder. Magic. We wait a sec. Ah, no. It's harder to really look behind the scenes a bit and what apparently drives us. So it was more an accident that we ended up with transportation. We had no clue back in 2012 or so when we founded the company what that meant. What we picked was the opportunity that a market opened up. Often, regulation or deregulation also for marketplace businesses are key. And it was similar for us. And even when we had no real clue how that worked, we had the idea that only individual traffic, transportation, or cars basically, or what was there provided by the incumbents was not good enough. So our vision is basically as old as the company to provide smart and green mobility for everyone to experience the world. Why is it like that? Well, smart is the marketing word for best value for money. So yes, we are comparably cheap, but it's not that we're the cheapest out there. This is not what is meaningful. It's just that the way how we do things is a little bit more efficient, and that leads to better pricing. And green is not only the color, but this is what I'll point out later. It's a matter of fact that going by bus, even with our standard fleet, the Euro 5 combustion engine, has per head the best carbon dioxide footprint compared to all the other modes of transportation. I have to admit, this is with a certain load factor of about 70%, but obviously this is what is needed to run the business profitable. And if some of you have read the news today, we talked about our first half year and having turned the company profitable over the case of last year and growing sustainably, so profitably, further over this year and the next couple of years. And if I talk about everyone to experience the world, well, experience the world is basically, what drives our folks. It's our purpose. I think there's a good reason to visit, family, friends, and discover, and to really experience the world rather than staying at home. And that drives us to not only have stayed in Germany, in Europe, but having been close to the customer needs, and therefore we were able to literally paint the world green. And with everyone, this is something which is the beginning of what I'd call similar to ordinary marketplaces. It's about how you can basically set your offers as seamless as possible to all the customers needed. And while others in the beginning were really looking how they'd design buses, whether there would be vending machines on board, we were clear that independent, whether you are in the US, in any country, here in Europe, in Turkey, whether you use an app, the website, or an agency, it has to be the same and seamless experience and as easy as hell to book a ticket if you have the need to go from A to B. In the meantime, we've been transporting more than 300 million people. I guess this year alone will be 100. And that makes us among the largest privately owned ground transportation companies in the world. We do that with a bunch of brands. The reason we kept the brands in Turkey or in the US is, well, our leverage is the underlying technology platform. Our leverage is the interface to our partners. Also, the marketplace businesses in some of the countries like South America. It's not so much the brand. Obviously, we've built up the Flix brand here in Europe, But the Camel Koç brand in Turkey or the Greyhound brand in the US are more than 100 years old. Everybody knows that. And you eventually have to cheat a little bit with their perception, which wasn't the best, for instance, in the US. But the ultimate driver was a bit how they did business, how they encounter the customer wishes, not so much the brand, and that's the reason we keep it. It's just too challenging and too costly to convince about 300 million US Americans that Flix is the new Greyhound. It doesn't make sense. With what you see, we are present in 41 countries. And that's the beauty about platform businesses or marketplace businesses, where you do not have too much capex, or in that kind of partnership or franchise model I come to in a second, you basically share, the OPEX, the cost perspective in growing the business, IT, customers, and the CapEx by owning the vehicles, the assets between more shoulders. It really makes it easy to internationalize, because you basically look at the needs and you look obviously at languages and regulatory environments, but you don't have to build factories. And that gave us the speed to do that in 41, and looking further, there is Chile to be started in fall, and then India will be early next year. We run about 4,000 buses, and here in Germany and Sweden, already 15 trains. We would have loved to, yet run more trains, but trains is such a thing where you wait forever until you get new trains produced. But truly, this is, alongside the internationalization, the second most relevant strategic pillar. So if you only look at Flix Train here in Germany and Europe, we believe there's kind of a renaissance of the tracks, the railway ahead of us in Europe, supporting the Green Deal. We believe that Flix Train itself can be a bit compared of what EasyJet and Ryanair did, in the 80s and 90s. And that's something we are, wanting to achieve on the tracks against the incumbents over the next 10, 20, maybe 30 years across Europe on the railroads. We serve about 5,500 destinations all around the world, and we do that on our core platform. I come to that in a second. So it's a single inventory, basically independent where you are. You can, select all of the destinations and run as a single Flix customer. When we started the business, we've been discussing, I don't know, maybe 50, maybe more business ideas. We just wanted to become entrepreneurs, which is important because that inner wish and some of what drove us even earlier, the level of competitiveness is also important, as what we've heard earlier, to really weather some storms. And it turned out that buses were great because it supported our underlying need to do something real, something tangible. There was no actual reason. I mean, back in the days, 12 years ago, marketplaces and these kind of things, pure digital plays, were relatively early. So buses were something great, and that's also what fuels how we act, how our team really delivers kind of joy, because we focus on the real life. We've been creating these 300 travel stories, and yes, most of them are positive. We've been seeing marriages. We have so much thank emails in terms of, hey, my family basically was born, and not only basically, we had that in case already born in a Flixbus. But obviously, on the other hand, dealing with real life means also real problems. From the easy things like having lost luggage, also in transportation to casualties, which you have to deal with. And unfortunately, also recently, we had one of those. And that means you really have to take care about what matters, and that is, not only the joy, but also safety and security. And we want to do that in a way so everybody, can really have sustainable and affordable travel. That's basically, the inner fuel why people, our folks, love to work together with us. When you look back how the business evolved, and also, being here in that conference for the Speed Invest folks, a bit of how it went. 2013 was our starting year. This is what we celebrate. We had 10th anniversary. The company itself is about 1.5 years older. But 2013 was the first bus which hit the road, and after we have proven in that case that our concept worked, that was the first time we literally got actual funding. And back then, Holzbrink, alongside with Unternehmertum, one of those pure German VCs based in Munich, started to support us. And we then took quite some speed. The challenge was there was a hell lot of competition. We were about 8 folks here in Germany. Some of them were incumbents like Post or Deutsche Bahn. And there was one other company which was based here in Berlin. And if you look back, Flixbus originally used to be blue. Mein Fernbus was the green counterpart here in Berlin, and we merged them together with the support of General Atlantic, which was the first growth investor joining us in 2014 and 15. And with that merger, based on having identified that both of the founder teams really shared the same vision, well, we managed to consolidate the market. And having, the market consolidation is important, I believe, not only in our partly marketplace, certainly 2000 platform business. Market consolidation is for all of you important because in our businesses, you want to be the pure market leader. Being the number one is the only thing what counts because the economy of scale matter quite a bit. In some markets, yes, number 2, fair enough. Everything else usually doesn't work. And therefore, it was important for us to become the market leader here in Germany, to not compete against each other, consolidate the market, and then focus on the rest of the world, having started in Europe. When we also kind of proved that with a blueprint how to launch a country and how to roll our business out into further countries, next investors really recognized, okay, this can't be only a German story, a German thing, but eventually can become global, starting in Europe, and then Silver Lake joined. And later on, we basically then started to really also look across Europe. And certainly that was not necessarily planned from day one on. So sometimes you just have some coincidences, some serendipity. When we originally started the US in 2018, we didn't plan that or had planned to take over Greyhound yet. What actually happened is our former managing director of France, he resigned because his wife had to start or wanted to start a job as a designer at Apple. I believe as designer is a cool thing. So he left with her to the States, and then 10 months later he came with a concept and said, like, folks, I anyhow couldn't work. This is how we would start Flix America. And why that point was very important for us, and we then rehired him as the managing director of Flix Inc., was a matter of fact that we really started operationalizing our M&A traction, so kind of building out a muscle there, so to really maintain the speed. The challenge about growth and high growth is if the baseline becomes larger, maintaining the same level of growth also becomes more challenging. So if we now have about whatever 1.5 to 2 billion of top line and want to still maintain a growth of whatever 20 or 30%, that's more challenging than having maintained a growth of whatever 40% back in the days when we only had a couple hundred million. So M&A was really crucial for us to also support the market consolidation, as I said, but in addition maintain the speed of growth. So when we then started in the US, we figured quickly that eventually even working with 2 brands can make sense, because 90% of the Flix customers back in the US, well, they never had used a single Greyhound bus before. And that was the trigger that we back then started already to prepare ourselves to eventually at one point in time take over Greyhound, because obviously that really, that helped to bring different folks together to grow the market, to add some additional value. In 2019, we were on the step to do so, to accelerate, train, to start in India already back then, and to eventually having taken over Greyhound. COVID hit, and that's the storms I guess we've been hearing. That was quite a thunderstorm. We had to cease our business for a bunch of weeks entirely, and believe me, even the good investors are not happy if there are no revenues, but a bunch of costs heading against you. thanks to a great team and to the patience of the investors and to some of the support, we not only mastered, oh, I know that guy. We not only mastered, thanks to Matthias and the rest of the team, we not only mastered that storm, but we really we were able to take some time to work on ourselves. In these high growth phase, you sometimes have the challenge that you're really trying to pick every and any cherry lying around, and then you eventually get derailed. And that's difficult on those platform marketplace businesses because there's so much opportunities. It's not a single kind of game sometimes. And if you get derailed, well, it becomes messy. So looking back, I mean, COVID was a tragedy, but eventually the company would not be in that shape we're currently at with not having had COVID to really, wind down, focus on ourselves, go into the gym and really, become more efficient. We stopped certain things. The marketplace business I come to in a second is just pure long-distance bus marketplace. We, in the meantime, had Flix Charter. We chartered buses out with partners, kind of marketplace. We had Flix Car, kind of a competition with BlaBlaCar. We had a bunch of stuff alongside with trains internationalization. And obviously, that's not the best use of money because we didn't focus. We stopped all that, as I said, went to the gym, and then we came out much stronger, and accidentally, we had the opportunity to, at the end of 2021, take over Greyhound. And therefore, really, had that opportunity I talked about to consolidate the US market, one of the largest long-distance coach markets in the world, I guess the largest in the Western Hemisphere. And that said, we really are now in the best shape ever. And basically, that's also the reason why we've been starting talking openly, more open about numbers. And if you believe the press, preparing ourselves for IPO, independent of the markets. Are they ideal? No. But it's on you. We were lucky that we have never been totally overpriced. So if they remain stable and nobody starts another war or that shit, I think it's good enough for us to also perform a decent IPO. On the other hand, how does the business work towards our partners? Some call it a franchise business. It's not so similar to McDonald's. Eventually, it's similar to Hilton. So we don't run too much of our assets. The partners do. And that's also the differentiation if you look at the partners, whether we'd call it a marketplace or a partner business. Usually, partner, they take the long-term CapEx invest. It's a long-term relationship. We do all the planning. We provide the platform, everything which is needed, underlying, and they do what they can best and have done for generations. They basically own a bus, maintain a bus, and run it in the most safe way. If you look back in what I initially said, the smart, best value for money, people originally thought buses only work because they're hilariously cheap. This is not the case. The inventory is the key. And that is what we became strong at, to build a proper timetable, a proper schedule, which really serves you in what you need. If you want to go from Berlin to whatever, Buxtehude, and you don't find that, you also don't care whether Berlin, Hamburg is super hilariously cheap. Doesn't matter. And over time, it's not just the €1 tickets when we started with, to a certain extent to attract people, but you really try to get the best value out of the money and, having a good offer on your end as a customer and having a profitable company on our end. And if you compare that, how important, these early steps is and that single large inventory is a bit like Amazon. In the early days of the internet, I compared everything. And then Amazon started relatively cheap. In the meanwhile, I still are with Amazon because they've got anything I need, but they're not cheap. They're, meanwhile, quite expensive. But it works, it's decent. And therefore, I more or less stopped comparing. And it's not that, in transportation people don't compare, but we remain a good relevant, alternative in the set of options. And that's based on the inventory, the need of the folks. Of course, also for pricing, but it's not only because you're cheap. Having talked about pricing, Flix is responsible for a bunch of things you see on the top. We basically do the network planning. We make sure we attract all the folks and also keep them from a marketing and sales perspective. We obviously have built the proprietary platform our booking funnel, making sure with A/B tests to really, stick to the rules of e-commerce, conversion rate, and do that very efficient. If we have within 1 year, took out the more than 30-year tech platform of Greyhound and rebuilt it with ours, or just pulled it in our platform, we not only were able to save a bunch of, 20s or 30s of OPEX annually for that maintenance, but we also changed the level of conversion rate on the Greyhound website by about 20%. So that's, what matters, because basically that's in between sales and marketing and booking funnel, and what is important, if these kind of booking funnels, and that's true for each and every platform, also the marketplaces, they're snappy, they're good, you may not want to lose people. Pricing, I talked about yet after, and that's not a joke, Matthias had been working on that forever. We meanwhile have almost 100%, you set the basis, 100% of automated pricing. So if my CEO talks about AI, I would not exactly say it's AI, but for the investors it's a good thing. Then he usually takes that as an example, because the algorithm, kind of machine learning algorithm, decides itself. And the last two items are very important, because that's a bit of the difference I come to in a second, where we compare, pure marketplace game and, our full integrated partner standard platform. The platform is important because we literally have gathered a ton of data over time, and based on the data, we become better and better. We obviously collect new data from the customers, from the competition, and that makes us better, gives us a higher outreach, makes us, better in deciding what the inventory is and pricing and all that. And that's also one of the reasons why, even other bus partners who do not want to repaint their buses green asked us to eventually set up something like a marketplace, because they wanted to, have our outreach, being part of our platform, making sure they can leverage the customer flow. But some of them decided we do not want to run green buses. Some of them had the idea to maybe also do their own pricing and their own network planning, and particularly on the operational side, so making sure knowing where all those buses are, or being fully accountable if things go wrong, so the customer service is on our side. This is different. That's the light-wide piece of us. That's the marketplace piece of us. They just hook up to basically leverage our sales power, leverage our e-commerce power, and can partly do something else, but they eventually stay their own business. So if you look them up, it's also not been called Flixbus, but whatever marketplace partner they're at. And that's either because they wanted to, or in many reasons also because that's the only way to grow together to start a market because of regulatory. In some markets, we cannot start with our standard model because of regulatory, because we may have to own the buses, or it's just not allowed from, for outside players to start the business, and then, you have some incumbents and try the light-wide, which is good because next to the organic growth blueprint and the M&A perspective, the marketplace gives us an additional fuel to maintain our level of growth. And now, for the last couple of minutes, the actual topic. Basically, if you're not only digital, people care what you do outside. And therefore, green became not only our color, but essentially our DNA. And I'm very frank with you, that didn't come on purpose. We basically started our business, and at some point in time, there was a statistics or a study of the German Bureau for whatever environment and stuff, Umweltbundesamt, and they said, like, by the way, going by bus is much greener than any other way of long-distance transportation. And we thought, oh, that's good. Back then, it was not as good as now with all that ESG and that push for the Green Deal, which is a good thing. It has not been, in that case, valued 10 years ago. But now it's great that we truly do not only run around in green, but act alongside. And that is true for, the Euro 5 combustion engines. So that's only the start, and obviously there's quite some room. And even now, if people have chosen Flix over their individual cars, they eventually saved quite some carbon dioxide. That was, as I said, just the beginning. We started with our fleet. Meanwhile, those Flix buses are rather modern. In the beginning, we also used to have some kind of refurbished or used buses. We started compensation. And even though it's only about 10% where people compensate. It's about double the amount which you see on average in aviation. We were the first ones to run electric buses in 2018. Unfortunately, that was, A, just Chinese models because the Europeans, weren't there yet, and B, which remains a challenge. Well, a 50-seater, just single-decker electric bus is almost as expensive as a double-decker with about 80 seats, sorry. Which means, that comes down to more expensive tickets, pretty simple. And we've been trying and we keep on pushing, but now, all of us are more talking about that than seriously acting. If you put the prices which we need to have in order to, serve 100% neutral bus traffic out there, people are not willing to pay it. So that's the reason we just iteratively take some more time, and at the end it'll take a little bit longer than 2030 to, in Europe, entirely, flip out our fleet. This is our commitment. And while we've been trying what kind of systems may work, whether it's a fuel cell or whatever, it turns out that I believe in Europe we'll see, just because of the regulatory and also the increasing technology, a fleet of battery-driven buses running around. And we are currently and finally together with Daimler to develop something on the vehicle side. But there's another reason beside of the vehicle and the cost why it takes a little longer than just 2 to 3 years. The infrastructure is not there yet. And if the infrastructure is not there yet, well, apparently, it wouldn't work if you can't charge the buses. Last but not least, looking into the future, there's another, I'm not calling it a storm, but a challenge we anticipate. While in the past, the deal was very simple, both on our standard core platform as well as the marketplace side. We run the show, they own the buses/vehicles. And they obviously also pay for the fuel. That's part of the deal. In the future, I don't know if battery-driven buses or the batteries eventually are being leased or still being owned. How does it work with electricity? That may have an impact on our model, which we are currently in the early phases to start to discover with the regulators, with our partners, because eventually that world will just look different, and then we may have to adjust our model again. So the future remains interesting. And when I talk about future, one of our values, beside I make an impact, we win together, and we push boundaries, is Flix is built for generations. So hopefully it stick around also if the next generation sits here and not us. So thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Very interesting. Again, are there any questions from the audience? Yes, I think you were first, so we start over there.
Micro is coming.
Mike is coming. And then I got you.
Hello, hello. Does it work? Yeah. Thanks for the very cool story. I understand that Flix is a marketplace from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
How is it from a regulatory perspective in terms of, are you guys in the money flow? Do you pay the bus owner per ticket?
Yeah, so that's interesting, because in standard marketplace environments it can be a challenge concerning BaFin, for instance, here in Germany. We avoided that to make ourselves, when making ourselves fully accountable. So it's a virtually integrated platform marketplace whatsoever. That means our revenues are literally including everything, also the bus partners' revenues. We account the bus partners' costs as costs, so it's been deducted, and then we talk about GP1. And that makes us also towards the customer, as I said, fully accountable. And therefore, it's towards the BaFin fair to collect the money, and it's not like in a classical sense, like whatever Delivery Hero, for instance.
Very smart. Thanks.
I think you were next.
Thanks for that. It was a really good story. One of the things I wanted to ask was about the very early days in 2013 when the first bus came in. How did you guys solve the cold problem, like getting supply and demand?
So
had the first bus, but
that's a very good question, and I have a very super ultra boring answer to that. We didn't really come to the point where it was clear it becomes a partner, franchise, marketplace, platform business. We initially also, calculated whether we buy the buses or we rent the buses, but that all didn't work out. Having buses on your P&L is not good. On investor stories, renting the buses, you really have quite a challenge if things do not always directly go smooth. So when we, encountered that kind of franchise or business partner model, we basically also encountered that there's a bunch of mid-sized bus companies out there. So what we did is we actually bought some yellow pages, some, basically data, and it turned out there's about 5,000 bus companies here in Germany. We started to reach out, mail, email, phone, and at the end, we seriously took my company car back then and ran around Germany and, rang their bells. And out of those 5,000, I don't exactly know, but it was about 7 or so with 30 buses. We ultimately converted after about a little bit more than a year. If you back then talk about conversion rate, we should rather have stopped that from the e-commerce perspective, but that was as simple as that. So no magic, we just groundwork, ran around, rang bell.
Thank you.
I think we get another question in the first row over here.
Hi, so how much of a gross profit margin are you able to achieve? And
So if we now guide, with investors, we basically, on long run, we guide on 15% growth on average over the next couple of years. Now it's still stronger, but at some point we will not over the next 10 years be able to maintain 50% or so. And we also talk about 15% of EBITDA margin, which is reasonable. And if you look about gross margin, it depends a bit. The structure is that we share the revenues. And we obviously have to continuously adjust on good lines. So if things run well, we get a cut of about 30% with the bus partner. If things don't run well, basically we barely get anything, but have to, a certain level of minimum guarantee to maintain, their survival.
so EBITDA is 15%, over 15% gross profit margin, right?
The 15% is EBITDA margin. So if you look at, the top margin, it's about 30%.
Amazing. Maybe over here. Oh, yeah.
Sorry about that. Ten from South Korea. We are a very young startup, so I would say I'm in day one of my founder's journey. And obviously, I have a lot of respect for what you and the team have been pulling off at Flix. And I'm just wondering if you could give me one advice. What is the number one thing that a founder needs to get right if you have a big ambition to make impact at scale, based on your experience or observation overall?
So it's not so, even though it was an investor, it's not so wrong what we've heard. I guess there are two things. That buzzword of resilience, because there's so much unknown, you won't be able to foresee, not in the best Excel, not with the smartest brains. So you have to have a certain level of resilience and just muddle through. And I personally always try to really have low expectations, because then I cannot be dissatisfied easily. And if you anyhow expect to be hit, well, then you recover and run faster. And we always enjoyed competition. It's sometimes ridiculous talks and not for the public, but you feel that energy of enjoying competition. We want to win. Andrea and myself, one of my two co-founders, we know each other for about 30 years, and we got to know better because we played volleyball together. And independent how strong, how strong the opponent was, if you start something like in sport, you want to win. According to the rules, that's the same in business. There are rules which we should comply with. We have to. But we always want to win. And these two things, I think, balanced us and supported us to have been able to achieve where Flix is now.
Thanks. Thanks. Really super interesting story. I had a question about one of the details. You mentioned that the electrification of the bus is too expensive. It's as much as 86. What did you say? 82. Could you explain a little bit, like, what's the cost structure? What's the thing that makes it so expensive? Is it a supply thing? Is it a battery?
So currently, combustion engines are kind of at the end of their life cycle. This is super cheap. There's a bunch of supplier structure for the OEMs who produce the buses. It's just cheaper to build them, and that obviously makes them cheaper if we purchase them. I think at some point in time, if there are more electric vehicles, in our particular case buses, of course, being built, they automatically become cheaper. If you really cut it down to the individual most expensive part, it remains the battery.
We have one all the way in the back.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Flix from Finmit, back here. Thank you very much, Daniel, for the insights. I have a quick question in regards to the train business. So you mentioned that one of the challenges that you guys have is actually the production, that it actually is quite long lead times, I imagine. Is that the only challenge that you're seeing there? That's the first question. And the second question, if I might add, why are you already diversifying the portfolio into the train business instead of, first of all, fleshing out completely the bus?
So the second question is easy. It always takes a little time to really add a new country and have it on a level so it contributes on both the top line properly, as well as at some point in time from an EBITDA perspective. So it's always between 3 to 5 years when it really matters. And then I'm also talking about larger countries. So for smallers, you literally have to collect them. And when collecting countries, independent how small or large they are, they add complexity you have to deal with from a tech perspective, for instance. So only doing that, well, if you do too many in parallel, you may have to swallow too much complexity, and that obviously is against your EBITDA margin because it increases OPEX. And if you do that more sequentially, then, well, with a lead time of 3 to 5 years contributing, there's a compression issue. First. Second, even though the international long-distance coach market is huge, we have enough fuel for the next 10 years, easy. And then, well, it depends a little bit on regulatory and these kind of things. So if you look ahead 30 years, the question is, what market is similar to our core market, but even larger? And the answer is long-distance rail. That was one of the reasons we originally went there. And it's not that easy that it's the one single topic looking at production. But while in the beginning, and also when we start new countries, the demand side on the bus is usually the challenge we try to tackle to identify enough customers who really want to take a ticket. On Flix Train, it is more a supply challenge. Defining and structuring the trains, waiting on when they're being built, and then partly also maintenance, because there are less train manufacturers and providers compared to bus manufacturers and providers, which makes it just more challenging on the supply side. And in the meantime, we also have tackled in the countries where we start train and grow that, the demand side quite a bit. Because people, from a customer perspective, they don't really care whether they hop on a bus or a train. The train is a superior product because it's faster and more comfortable. But at the end, if you want to go from A to B, and the Flix app sends you to a train station rather than a bus station, you wouldn't care. You just hop at the green train. And for us, underlying, it's more on the supply side than it used to be by bus on the demand side.
Cool. Thank you very much.
All right. I think those last two questions, and then.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation. I mean, you talked about the importance of the M&A strategy to build Flix. Can you talk about what the biggest challenge was of having to integrate a legacy provider like Greyhound?
So it depends. If there are providers which are relatively modern and similar to us, years ago we took over Polski Bus. The challenge is just, that we keep on our own pace and, we just have a proper project management, but it's more on us. The challenge for companies like Kamil Koch or Greyhound with, own buses, own production, clerks, mechanics, all that stuff is that you take your own experience and knowledge as superior and stop asking the folks over there what they actually need. We made that mistake at Kamilkoch quite a bit, not because we were arrogant, also because we were arrogant, but we couldn't go there. We took over Kamilkoch, and while the integration started, there was COVID. And then we just had to figure it out remote. They were not super fluent in English. We were not super fluent in Turkish. So, and we learned quite a lot, but when we thought we had done everything, we flipped our platform. It didn't really function. It was decent, but not that we, gave quite applause. And with that learning, we're much more on the ground trying to understand what the actual needs of Greyhound is, in addition of what we can bring to the table. And that piece, to really try to have at least known unknowns, but not just thinking because we're great all over the place, it will work in Turkey automatically. That's something which is important if you encounter these legacy players. And I have to admit, we were quite good, I think, at Greyhound, but only because we weren't that good at Kamilkoch.
Right.
Well, thanks, Daniel, for the presentation. I'm Leonard from Bex Technologies, and I wanted to ask you, because we are in the construction logistics space with our platform, and there is a huge shortage of skilled drivers with the driving licenses for large commercial vehicles. And I guess it's the same, probably even harder when you transport people instead of bags of concrete. So how are you conquering that without having a direct access to the drivers, but through your franchise or marketplace partners?
So yes, we have the same challenge. We, in Europe, partly leverage when we increase the pool further to the east. And we do that jointly. So our bus partners can leverage our brand, which eventually here and there is more attractive and we have more reach. But there is also no secret source. In some other areas like the US, we literally have to pay, signing bonuses. And yes, construction and logistics, they pay even more hilarious amounts of money. That's something which in the mid-term, will remain a challenge. In the US, then you look down to Mexico, for instance. I believe that's something where, technology, partly autonomous driving, partly supported driving, like remote-controlled, technologies, can support us. Because the challenge is that's a super stressful job, highly impactful compared to pilots not well enough paid. But again, it's a little bit capped because obviously people are willing to pay more for a flight than a bus ride. So it's a little bit of a dilemma. I believe technology can solve there. And until then, we just have to work on remaining attractive, and we increase the pool where we look at, further to the east here in Europe, to the south in the US. No additional magic I can offer, unfortunately.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Daniel.
Thank you very much.